Welcome to VLGA Connect. My name is Catherine Arndt and I'm the Chief of the VLGA Connect studio. I hope you enjoy today's Connect episode brought to you by the VLGA, the national broadcaster on all things local government.
A very big hello, happy new year, and welcome to TGU. We're calling it. Doesn't everyone love a good acronym? It's the governance update with a shiny new cover for a shiny new year. And I'm very pleased to have joining me today the A team. We've got from Hunt and Hunt Lawyers, our terrific sponsors, Tony Raunic. Hello, Tony.
G'day, Chris. G'day, Julie.
Nice to see you again in a brand new year. And Julie Reid is with us as well. Hello, Julie. How are you?
Good morning, Chris. How are you? How are you, Tony? And Happy New Year to both of you.
Thank you very much.
How have people survived without you, Chris, and your sort of ragtag bunch for the last 6 weeks or so?
Oh, thanks very much. The ragtag bunch. I guess you're damning yourself with that that phrase, aren't you? There's been so much happening, and we've got quite a bit to get through, which is why we thought we'd pull a full panel together today to work through some recent stories of great interest, I'm sure, across the local government sector. So we'll get stuck into it, I think. And of course, the big story, really, the one that's got all the attention, the story where I don't think there really was a story, to be honest, was an opinion poll that made the front page of the Herald Sun, generated a lot of discussion. So tick, mission accomplished there, with cancel culture really coming for local councils in Victoria. And Tony and Julie, if you saw this and you got into the detail, there were some findings in this very small survey of less than 1,200 people that found that a large number of people, I don't think it was a majority, but it was a large number of people that felt that their local councils could be abolished, that they weren't actually useful and the state government should take over local government services. I'll start with you, Julie. What did you make of that?
Oh, Chris, I thought, maybe it's a slow news week or something.
That's true. Yeah, I'm sure that's right.
I think in January, I feel that it's the time when councils seem to get the eye of the media, and for not good reasons. And so I was so disheartened by it. And all I could think about was, what about all those people that are feeling really satisfied with council services? Where are their voices? Because we hear about those every year in the council surveys that are done locally. It just, I was perplexed and disheartened. And I started to then unpick, well, why have they done this and who's done it? And I started to try and get into the detail. It's interesting that the focus seemed to be on the millennials. I think there's a message in that for us, for local government, about how do we connect with those younger people that may not necessarily be, say, paying rates. What do we do to connect with them? But I know that there's great programs that are happening across local government for millennials. So, look, I was... Yeah, that was the situation I was in, and I just think there's a bigger and better story out there.
Tony, what were your thoughts?
Oh, well, firstly, big screaming headline, call to cancel councils. Probably a bit misleading, really. Even when you look at the survey results, I thought, there was still a majority of people that either weren't sure that they wanted to see their local council removed or were very much against that. With all these things, it's what you ask. And I thought I saw one of the questions was, would you like, less and larger councils in order to reduce spending? And of course, that's a pretty leading question for a lot of people. They would then assume that means, a reduction in rates. Look, we're not a love brand. I think that's a truism, and we are involved as local governments in not just in delivering services, but also in delivering decisions where there are winners and losers. And so, there's going to be elements of unpopularity at times. But yeah, I just thought it was just an easy free kick where they reeled out a couple of controversial public art installations once again, and then sort of juxtapose that against this notion that well, clearly councils are wasting money and wasting our time, and we'd be better off without them. Which I was really taken by Joseph Hawil's article in response. Actually, I thought it was an excellent article, made some really, really strong points.
Yes, it certainly did, and I'm hoping to speak to Joseph for a longer discussion about that. I was a bit torn about even drawing attention to this, I must confess to you, Tony and Julie, but I think one thing that it has shown is that people are prepared to now jump in and have this debate, because you can't ignore the fact that this comes up on a regular basis, and it points to a need for the sector and perhaps more broadly for work to be done to better sell the value of the work that local councils do for their communities, because we all know what happens when you try and take away any sort of service that's being delivered by councils, quite aside from the roads, rates and rubbish. I think Joseph's article makes really good points about why that is such an outdated trope and just, shouldn't even be entertained anymore. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree, Chris. I mean, it's just, we've moved on so much in local government since then. It's the same story that's wheeled out over and over again. It's, local governments have now become much more innovative and much more interesting in what they offer the community. And, you're right. It's a very, very difficult decision for a council to make, to remove any services from the community, because there's, when that's done, there's outcry. Yeah. So it is difficult, but I do understand that, the financial side of things is tough for councils, and particularly for the rural and regional councils. So there's got to be some discussions around, what happens next around that. But it's I think it's really unfair. The difficulty I think that councils have is, how much do they promote themselves? How much do they promote the services that they offer? You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, because sometimes you start to promote and then people say, well, what are you spending all this money on promotion of services for? So you can't win sometimes, and that's the difficulty. But I think that we have traditionally as a sector been maybe not so good at really promoting the great work that we do. I think maybe some councils that's getting a little bit better, but I think
and it doesn't help that occasionally you'll have a council here or there that kicks an own goal that actually reflects on the entire sector. One thing I want to put at you, we've got so much to talk about, so I want to move on from this if we can soon, is the response from the Premier was interesting and got quite a bit of coverage, and particularly the line he said that councils should just get on with sticking to their primary responsibilities. And he made it clear that there was no intentional, certainly no announcements being made about structural reform, etc. But that primary responsibilities statement, I think in itself is a problem, because it brings the roads, rates and rubbish people out of the woodwork, because they see that as being council's primary responsibilities. We know it's so much more than that. Is that an unhelpful statement for the Premier to have made?
Certainly doesn't reflect the reality of his own legislation, or that says these are the objectives of council and they're very broad and they go to culture and disadvantage and issues much more beyond the delivery of those 3 R's in terms of the services. But also, look, I do think that there have been times when we've got it wrong as a sector, and there's times when I think that there are some municipalities who've perhaps gone a bit further down that path of fighting, as they say, that culture war, and that that has reflected in sometimes poorly on the sector. But it's to think that you've got this local bureaucracy that is somehow imperfect and not delivering services as well as it ideally might, and that would somehow be improved by taking those responsibilities and giving them to an even larger bureaucracy that's more remote, to me seems like just a ridiculous notion. And I think Joseph Hawil really made that point strongly in his article in response.
He certainly did. Julie, what was your reaction to those comments from the Premier?
Oh, yeah, look, I was along the lines of Tony, thinking the same sort of thing. But where I was thinking was more in the messages that have been coming through more from the state recently about shared services. There's been, and I know probably shared services is a little bit old now, Chris. Maybe we need a new terminology, but some of the signs of some of the grants that are coming out from state government talk about, working together, councils working together. So there's a really clear message there about, work together and try and create some efficiencies. And I'm thinking, well, if councils don't do that, then what's the next step? What is government then going to be saying if we fail to demonstrate that we can actually work together and create some efficiencies, particularly in those really small councils where financial sustainability is really a big question at the moment. So
just on that Julie, there are some conspiracy theories out there, and I know there was an article that's behind a paywall from Crikey that raised some interesting connections between the people who did the survey and the government itself, and seem to be, no, I don't want to say, I don't want to put it the way I was going to put it, but some are suggesting there is a hidden agenda behind all of this to create an appetite for structural reform, for amalgamation, further amalgamation of councils. Do you buy into that?
Could be. I don't know. It hasn't been on the lips of anybody for a while. We've just had an election.
Have we been watching too many conspiracy movies, Tony?
It's a safe space now to be starting to talk about all of this.
Yeah, good point.
I don't think we can rule it out.
Okay. Tony, I haven't been watching too many conspiracy movies then.
You might have, Chris. Look, I haven't heard the talk around the traps about a revisit to, that amalgamation issue. But let's watch it play out.
All right, let's leave that there. We've got some links that we'll pop in the show notes if you want to do some reading up on those stories. Mission accomplished, Herald Sun. You've managed to make local government the centre of a very slow news week, but I don't think we can just let these things go through to the keeper. We need to challenge them, discuss them, as many like Joseph Haweel are doing, and hopefully we can continue to do that. I'll whip through another few stories of interest. The rate cap has been announced. There's been a lot of debate about this as well, because the ESC recommended 4% for Victorian councils. The minister set 3.5%, which is double that of last year. Reaction to that?
I thought, yet again, the state government have really constrained councils' ability somewhat here to maintain services at the same rate they were previously given. It's not a real increase, and hopefully the state government show the same sort of level of constraint with their own charges, as they have done here. Given the Essential Services Commission were recommending, as you say, 4%, and there's been that pegging back for councils here.
Surprise around the sector about that, or pretty much as expected, Julie, do you think?
Oh, look, I think it's been welcomed, the fact that it's greater than last year. So don't get me wrong in the sense that I think that there's a decision that's been made and it's more. So probably, I don't know whether it's more than what people have anticipated. I haven't quite got that sense. I think some have been really, really conservative, maybe in starting to prepare their budgets and thinking it's going to be less than that. But I don't have a full sense of the reaction to the Essential Services Commission and the decision from the minister. But I know that they're welcoming an increase from last year. But as we know, it just doesn't go far enough to meet the escalating costs of what councils are facing, and particularly, even just in materials alone in the building industry. I mean, we know what's going on there.
Absolutely right. So pretty much as expected is my read of the room on that one. So there's been 6 countbacks this week, folks, conducted, and we're just getting started because there's a few councillors that have been, former councillors, been elected to state parliament, some resignations as well outside of that process, and one of those featured in the countback this week. I might just whip through these. If you've got any comments, feel free to jump in. So Ben Ladson has taken Kim O'Keefe's spot at Greater Shepparton Council. Ben ran a campaign, it's all still there on Facebook, looking for reining in of council spending, etc., back in the campaign. So it'll be interesting to see his priorities once he gets around the council table. Jade Benham at Swan Hill has been replaced by Jackie Kelly. Robbie Nyagai is the new councillor at Port Phillip, replacing Catherine Copsey. Michael Glenatsis has been elected in Yarra to replace Gabrielle De Vietri. Joe Gianrido, I hope I'm saying that right. Joe is replacing Alexander Liu, who's resigned, but nothing to do with the election, the state election, that one, at Stonnington. And we have the state's first, now I just want to make sure I get this language right. There's a story here that I'll pop in the show notes. The state's first openly transgender councillor, having been elected at Colac, Otway, in the seat that Joe McCracken had, and that is Tosh Jake Finnegan, who's 29 years of age and came through that countback this week. So some new faces around council tables in the coming weeks.
Yeah, it will be
Fantastic news.
really challenging too for councils. You know, it changes the dynamic as a new person comes in. You know, 2 years into a term, there's a challenge of, you know, inducting those individuals, but also I think it's an opportunity for councils to, you know, revisit how they, you know, function together, some of their internal commitments as part of that inducting in the new council, because I think quite a number of those names that you read out there, Chris, they're, I think, first-time councillors.
I think they all are. I think they all are. And you make a really good point, Tony, about how it does change the dynamic of the council. People shouldn't underestimate how the change of one individual in that group can actually completely reset the way that team works. Julie, you've seen that yourself, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's right, Chris. And, you know, a passionate topic of mine is, you know, working in teams and working effectively, and particularly with councillors. You know, I think that, you know, one extra person in there, depending on their personality, depending on what they stand for, you know, it's an interesting dynamic to throw into the mix of a group that might have settled down after a period of 2 years. So, yes, I think that there's potential change for those councils. There's probably a need for a bit extra support for that particular councillor to be able to get them up to speed. But also too, Chris, I mean, when they come in, they might have a different agenda. There might be a need to refresh on the priorities of the council because 2 years in the term, how are you going with your council plan? You've got 2 more years to go. You're well underway in terms of delivery. You know, is that going to be affected by someone new coming in? So refreshing the priorities might be a good idea.
Yeah, good point. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out at those councils. Still to come, Brimbank and Greater Geelong countbacks, and Melton. So 3 of them coming next Monday. The following Monday, there's a countback at Mornington Peninsula for the councillor that resigned, Kerry McCafferty, and then Paul Mercurio's seat at Mornington Peninsula, because he was elected to state parliament, that will be determined by a by-election, and that's coming up on the 18th of March. And we've seen some media coming out from the VEC about that timeline and process just recently. Which leads us, team, to that issue of, you know, why countbacks in some cases, why by-elections in others. It's all to do with the electoral structure that's in place at those particular councils. And we're about to start, or the VEC and a panel is about to start the review process for, I think, 30-something councils over the next couple of years. And we've had the timeline announced for 12 rural shires this week, and it kicks off next week. This is fun time for those councils.
Yeah, a lot of work involved in submissions here, and a lot of community interest in the outcomes here. So yeah, it will be a really interesting process to watch, Chris.
So I know you're getting around the state working with a few councils, Julie. So some of these might be councils you're working with. So Bullock, Gannawarra, Northern Grampians and Yarra Ambiac. Their process starts next week, and it entails basically a public information session, a public submission period. There's an independent panel been appointed, and we'll pop a link in the show notes so you can see all the details of who's on the panel, etc. There's 2 panels, I believe, and some standby members. And then in the next few weeks after that, Corangamite, Surf Coast, Campaspe, Strathbogie, Hepburn, Moorabool, Central Goldfields and Mount Alexander Shire councils will all start their processes. And the reason why this is significant is for many of these councils, it's the first time that they'll get to see or influence how the new requirements of the Local Government Act are going to be implemented in their municipalities, because the days of multi-member wards are pretty much on the way out, aren't they?
That's correct, Chris. And I think there's going to be a bit of change there, which might be hard for the councils to adjust to, because they've heard stories from other councils about that kind of change. But look, looking at the panels that have been set up, you know, very credible people, Chris, to work through that process. So it'd be interesting to see what comes out the other side.
Should we talk about who's on those panels? I'll just quickly call it up. So panel 1 is Frank Vincent, AO, Liz Williams, who was with the Electoral Commission for a long time, and Electoral Commissioner Warwick Gately. And I believe there's a requirement for a VEC person to be on each panel. And then Julie Eisenbice is the chair of panel 2, along with Tim Presnell and Deputy Electoral Commissioner Dana Flemington. And as I said, there's some backup members too. I don't have that list in front of me, but it's all there if you want to click through on the VEC website. Okay, so reviews starting. I know people have been waiting to find out about that. Speaking of reviews, the Local Government Inspectorate has reviewed how compliant councils have been with the requirements of the new Local Government Act. I don't know when we stopped calling it new, by the way, because we're getting into 2023 and it came out in 2020.
It's not new anymore.
No, very, very true. But the Inspectorate found that after reviewing, I think, more than 1,000 policies, documents, etc., that there was an average compliance rate across all of Victoria's councils of 93%, which they've hailed as pleasing. I always used to worry when I was studying and would get anything less than 100 and want to know why I lost those couple of marks. I want to know why we've lost these 7 marks here.
You're a perfectionist, Chris.
You are a perfectionist. And look, you know, I was really pleased. I thought that it was going to land like that, Chris. I remember when this project started, and I, you know, I remember talking at the time about, you know, how I thought across the sector that the sector was doing really well at compliance with these policies that were required to be completed. So I wasn't surprised at the results. I thought it was great, and I knew that the councils had done a great job in responding to the Local Government Act in a time, which they talk about in the report, in a time that was so difficult during COVID.
Very true. And I think it was a great example in many cases of councils working together to make sure they weren't all reinventing the wheel on a lot of those, you know, documented processes and policies that needed to be implemented or updated. Tony, there were some recommendations. There were 8 in total, but some particularly around the CEO employment and remuneration processes, and a couple of other things around governance rules, election period policy, etc. Were they sensible recommendations in your view?
I thought the Inspectorate's recommendation that Local Government Victoria come in and perhaps provide some formal guidance in relation to some of these areas. I think, as you're right, they certainly named the CEO employment matters committees and how independent advice is given. I know that there's certainly an element through the sector where councils are really unsure with some areas and are looking for that guidance. And one of the ones that comes to mind to me, which I didn't see in that list, is the best practice procurement guidelines, which are a 2014 document. I know that procurement teams at councils are using those guidelines still each day of the week now, and yet they haven't been rewritten. They refer to all the 89 legislation, and my understanding is that I know I don't know this firsthand, but local government Victoria have said we haven't got the resources to update that document. Now, I think somewhere through a state government entity, we do need some work on that, quite outdated document now, and the sector just doesn't have at a municipality level the resources to go into a writing of a set of guidelines like that.
Julie, I know you're not inside the tent anymore, but I'm sure you keep your ear to the ground. Since the recent election, there's been some machinery of government changes. Local government's sitting in a different part of government now, as I understand it. Is that going to help or hinder, do you think, this opportunity for LGV to be more or less supportive of the sector generally?
Oh, look, I've always seen the LGV have been very supportive of the sector, and the staff there are really committed to trying to make a difference and help as much as possible. So I don't think any of that has changed, because you're still going to have the same staff. I can't see that they're necessarily going to get a whole lot more resources. That's not going to be necessarily forthcoming, I don't think.
Yeah, that's really what I was getting at with my leading question.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I think now sitting in government services, it might have a slightly different profile, which might be better. I don't know. I'm going to watch that really closely and see how it unfolds. But I'm hopeful that the profile of local government will be different. Maybe in this new department.
I just feel we're sort of being left to work it out for ourselves a little bit. So with the supply issues with construction and that, and councils are grappling with, do we go to cost plus contracts, and then how do we manage that? And would there be some guidance from the state government potentially that might assist us here? But at the moment, councils are really being left to try and work out for themselves how do they deal with this sort of unprecedented situation, and still somehow meet all those probity requirements for tendering. And there doesn't seem to be, that I'm aware, any current effort underway to provide that sort of sector-wide guidance.
We'll take those comment, I think, Tony, but it's something you made there which has got my mind going. Cost plus contracts, what would the implications of that be in terms of the legislative framework that we have? Well,
because you're resolving as a council that we're going to spend a certain amount of money usually on a project. Now, if you don't actually know what the cost is going to be, how, what's the probity issues there? What's the resolution when, and how are you budgeting for something that you don't actually know what the ultimate price is going to be? So this is something that the state government sector are grappling with as well, and it would be great if we could, I guess, have some assistance with some policies.
All right, we might leave that one there. Time's getting away. I'm going to whip through a few stories. Jump in if you've got a comment. If not, we'll let it go through to the keeper. The acting CEO at the City of Greater Geelong has been in the press because of a personal matter which has gone to VCAT. So basically, he's a property owner. The council made a decision about a planning application that was a rejection, basically, of a two-lot subdivision proposal. He's challenging that at VCAT, and the press in Geelong has gone pretty berserk over that scenario. Tony, I can see you want to say something.
Yeah, look, I thought, look, to the uninitiated, that there might seem to be a real story here, but it's about managing conflicts of interest, and it would seem that in this instance that the conflict was appropriately managed. The question is always, does the person who has the personal interest have they got some role in the decision-making process. Of course, they ought not have a role in the decision-making process where they have a personal interest. And in this case, I understand the acting CEO was not part of the council decision. And indeed, the acting CEO used an external project manager to liaise with council officers, etc. And when you're talking about a regional community, and we like to encourage, local staff, senior staff who live in the area, it's understandable that there are going to be instances where they have a personal interest, where they own land, where they have interests in or connections to local organisations and schools. And it's nothing new for councils and council officers to learn to know how to manage those conflicts. And I thought that appears to have been done very well here.
Some good context there, Tony, and some subtleties that I don't think came through in the media reporting. And you make a good point. If I had $1 million for every time I've heard a councillor say, why can't more of our staff work in the municipality, I'd be a billionaire. And you can't have it both ways. Although if people are going to work in the municipality and live in the municipality, there's going to be personal interests that come up from time to time. I do make the point, though, it's not the council that's creating the controversy or the conflict here. It's really the media, as far as I'm seeing it. I don't think the council said much at all appropriately. What's next on my list? The Mayor of Baw Baw Shire Council, Anne-Marie McCabe, has taken a leave of absence to contest the supplementary election in Narrackan. This is that seat at the state election that where the election failed because one of the candidates passed away during the election period. Deputy Mayor Michael Leaney has taken over mayoral duties in the interim, so I'm sure we wish Anne-Marie well with her campaign.
Absolutely, I think be a tough one. I don't think a number of the major parties aren't running in that seat, so I think there's one party probably likely to win that. Yes.
Okay. There's an electoral outcome prediction for you from Tony Raunic. Submissions to the Commission of Inquiry for Moira Shire Council closed today as we record this, and I did notice they added an additional public drop-in session by appointment only, which was occurring yesterday for people to meet with the commissioners, Francis O'Brien and John Tanner. I know you can't say too much, Tony. You've had some involvement with that, but I think from memory, the Commission is required to report back by the end of February.
That's right. So I'm acting for the current councillors at Moira, but yeah, that's certainly the current time frame under the terms of reference, and we seem to be, on timetable, it would appear. Excellent.
Now, this could be a sleeper for the sector generally across the country. I don't know if you've looked into this at all, Tony or Julie. Hornsby City Council in New South Wales, this is where Philip Ruddock, the former federal MP, is the mayor, is leading a High Court challenge against the validity of GST payments imposed on local governments. And there's a very complex constitutional argument in here that I must admit I struggle to get my head around on first read, but I think, and Tony, you might be able to correct me, I think what they're claiming is that the arrangement in place requires councils to pay notional GST, and if they don't, the equivalent amount would be removed from any grants that they receive from the federal government. They're arguing that that is unconstitutional. Is that a fair, simple layman's?
It's a fair, simple layman's explanation. Absolutely. Is it likely to succeed or not? Well, I don't know, but there's certainly been over the years a whole series of High Court cases on tax that have ultimately really influenced the way, in a major way, the way our tax system works, going right back to those uniform tax cases from the 1940s. And this one could have really big implications for the sector. I thought, good on Philip Ruddock, the old grandfather of the parliament. He hasn't gone off into, blissful retirement, but he's the mayor of Hornsby. I didn't realise that. And ironically was was, of course, in the federal cabinet when the Howard government introduced the GST back in 2000.
Exactly. The Guardian had the exclusive on that during the week, and of course the angle for them was the Philip Raunic angle and that association with the Howard government at the time of the introduction of the GST. But Julie, it also points out, if successful, I mean, this is tens of millions of dollars, perhaps more, across 537 councils in the country. But that then leads me to think, well, okay, if they succeed and they get that money back or don't have to pay that money, surely it'll be picked up in some other ways, because as we often say, there's no bottomless bucket of money coming from other levels of government to councils.
That's right, Chris. And I think we can get excited about it and we can hope for a positive outcome. But yeah, look, I think I agree with you. In some way, shape or form, that money will come back. So yeah, look, I think it's one to watch. I think it will be an interesting case, and I think it was a sleeper, because I didn't pick it up, and you know, thank you for picking it up, because I think that's a really good one to watch.
So that's what I do these days, folks. I pick up these sleepers and pop them on the Local Government News Roundup website if you want to keep up with breaking news in the world of local government. A couple of other stories I've put there in the last week that you might want to check out. We're running out of time to talk about them. In Queensland, a councillor has been taken to task by a private organisation, by Rex Airlines, basically, over some comments made in a council meeting in debating a proposed project. This is from Maranoa Regional Council. What this has led to is a call from the peak body in Queensland for protected speech laws for councillors so they can freely debate things in the chamber. This has come up in my time in working with councillors frequently, actually, where councillors would like to think that they have some sort of parliamentary privilege, which doesn't exist at the local level. Do you see that often, Tony, in your work?
We certainly see councillors being threatened with defamation, and on occasions we do see those proceedings being brought against councillors, and so we need to be mindful of those provisions when speaking publicly. But yeah, it does seem to be an anomaly that at other levels of government, when you're speaking in the parliamentary chamber, for example, there is that privilege, and that isn't afforded to our local government councillors.
One of many anomalies with the level of government that's closest to the people, such as public question time at council meetings, which you don't see at state and federal level. And one particular council in Tasmania has this week been debating changes to their policy to rein in some difficult people in the chamber. There's one man who's been asking, I think it was 140 odd questions over a 12-month period, and he's not even a ratepayer of that council. He's asking them on behalf of other ratepayers, apparently, and they're politically motivated, is the claim from the mayor. So we'll pop that in the show notes. We're running out of time to talk about, unless Julie or Tony want to have a comment on that before we wrap things up.
Constant problem for councils, isn't it? The resources that are spent on providing answers.
Anything from you, Tony or Julie, that wasn't on our list that you want to raise with our audience this week before we say bye-bye?
No, it's such a bumper week already, Chris.
It has been, and look, there's a few more things on my list that will probably carry over, but I'm sure there'll be more in the next 7 days as well. So thank you for joining me on this bumper 2023 kickoff edition of TGU. I know you've got a busy time ahead out in the field, Julie, so really appreciate your time. I hope you have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Chris. And
Tony, to you, always appreciate your insights. It's great to have a lawyer on the panel to provide some context. And of course, we're very grateful to you and Hunt Lawyers for sponsoring the program here at VLGA Connect.
Oh, thanks, Chris. Always fun.
So there you go. That's TGU, episode 1 for 2023. We do hope you found today's program of interest. You can find us on YouTube or on your podcast player. Look out for some more very exciting new programs coming from VLGA Connect very soon. Looking forward to telling you about those. But for now, it's bye for now.